Hey friends, Dean here. Before we get you on to your episode, I want to take a moment to invite you to our next virtual online trivia night. Wednesday, May 13th at 8 p.m. Join us either on our Facebook group or on our YouTube page for 3 rounds of fun trivia, music questions, movie questions, general knowledge questions. It'll be a fun time and a chance to win some prizes and have just a good relaxing night of some trivia at home. You don't even have to go out for it. So don't forget, Wednesday, March 13th at 8 p.m. Join us on our Facebook group or YouTube for 3 rounds of fun virtual online trivia. We'll see you there. In this episode, put on your life jacket and get on board the yacht with us as we join Steely Dan in the pursuit of musical perfection with their album Asia. Stay with us.
Get ready for the 3324 podcast, where lifelong friends Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber share their love of all things music and movies. Dean has directed short films and is a music trivia buff, and Eric, trained in audio engineering, brings his extensive knowledge of music and film to the conversation as they discuss, debate, and celebrate their favorite albums, films, and much more.
Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it so much. We have a big ask. You've obviously found us here, but you know what? Finish the job and go onto social media. Join us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast. If you're into the Twitter thing, we're there too with 3324p. And joined, as always, by my good friend. I've known him a lifetime. Eric Kuber, and he might say it's a life sentence.
Hey, wow! I like how he puts words in my mouth. Jesus Christ! No. Oh, it's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
he's keeping it low key.
That's right. I have no comment.
No comment. What? No. Oh boy. So this album, Steely Dan's Asia, was one of the first ones. I know when we started this was like one of those foundational albums that I felt was important to talk about and celebrate.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You know, it was just like kind of when when that master list was being made, when we were contemplating this and figuring out what we were going to do and what kind of content. This album was like right there. It was fully in the mix with everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Perfection. That's, I mean, I'm not gonna jump the gun here, but let's,
Well, I said it in the beginning too. I mean,
yeah, let's.
If you're not into Steely Dan, hopefully this episode will compel you to at least listen to this album. So let's start off, as we always do, with the stats. Of course, we love stats. I love statistics. That's my
Yes,
lifeblood is statistics.
Indeed, yes.
And trivia.
The trivia king.
Take this knowledge in and I absorb it.
Yep.
Hold it for decades if need be. And then it'll come out when needed. I'll just pull out this, random information that no one really cares about. So this album was released in September of 1977, produced by Gary Katz, and he produced every Steely Dan album. He went, from at least from their original run, their 70s to 1980 run. This won a Grammy Award, not surprisingly, or surprising that it didn't win more, but it won for Best Engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Hit number 3 on the Billboard charts, and it did it quite quickly. It rose up the charts pretty fast and was certified 2 times platinum, which is hard to believe. That's 2 million copies. I'm going to think it's more than that. All songs written by Walter Becker and Donald Fagen. Another duo, another tandem songwriting team. We just did our Squeeze episode.
Yeah.
And we talked about Chris Difford and Glenn Tilbrook as a functioning unit that was on the same page and was able to get great things done musically. And Walter Becker and Donald Fagen are no different.
Yeah, but I would say they're. Let me start by saying they're slightly in the opposite direction in terms of. There's just something so funny about their demeanor and their just the way they carry themselves in the lyrics and in the music itself. They're New
Yorkers.
They're so deadpan.
Yeah,
they could be Muppets. To me, they're like Waldorf and Statler. They're so, they could be
Very low
real,
key.
very cynical,
Yeah.
very deadpan, very sort of like they're just characters in themselves. Like it's just, and but they're smart,
Oh yeah.
and they carry that intellectual air, I guess, on their sleeves, and it's that. Well, I mean, the music, it shows in the music. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no doubt
Yeah,
about it. So,
absolutely. I
yeah,
mean, this is musical architecture
yeah,
at its finest. And we've talked about some other artists that are musical architects, and some that are not, right? We've talked about some artists that there are different approaches to music, to making music. And when we talked about Tom Petty and some other artists, there's the camp that you go in there and you pretty much rehearse the heck out of something and then you record it. Everybody plays and records it in very minimal overdubbing, but you get like the one take and that's the master, and then maybe you add some backing vocals.
yes,
Then we see musical architects like Brian Wilson that are building and creating sounds and layering and trying different things and using the studio as that instrument. And we've talked about, Lindsey Buckingham the same way. He does it as a self-contained unit when he does his solo stuff. We've talked about ELO. We've talked about some other bands as well that do it. And I think Steely Dan has taken it to like the nth degree with this album, because this was kind of like Asia. So it's spelled AJA. So if you never knew how to pronounce it, like Aja, or it's Asia,
it's Asia,
like the continent.
right.
So it's very simple. No, we'll get that out of the way. At least we've dropped
Not
that
to be
piece of
confused
knowledge.
with the band Asia, the
That
super
too.
group, that too was which was pretty much around the
Not too far away. Yeah,
not too far away. A few years later. So yeah,
yeah.
But,
So what's your connection to Steely Dan?
They're actually right in my wheelhouse. They talk about being misfits, and there's several songs that they're, even on this album, Deacon Blues in particular, they talk about someone being sort of different and, kind of introverted, and, that's definitely me. And so, yeah, I mean, there's no question as to why I love them. And musically speaking, it's everything that I love in terms of mixing, rock with jazz and blues. And, I've loved that kind of stuff from ever since the early days with, a lot of the bands of the period, but they refined it to a certain extent that they just kind of, it could be very smooth. It could be rough around the edges. I mean, it's just, I think of albums like Royal Scam, which I'm really, really, it's hard for me because I actually really love that album, but it's so dark.
Mm-hmm.
It's like and it's the one right before this. So yeah, there's that, there's that edge of like, which one do I like better? I guess it depends on what kind of mood I'm in, but yeah, but for me, I didn't have a lot of their albums, so to speak. I had the greatest hits.
Me neither.
I had Decade of Steely Dan, and I played the hell out of that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually in the 90s, they released Citizen Steely Dan, which was all their albums in a box set. And that's what I had that on CD. So I had the opportunity to listen to everything, and then some. So yeah, but I got to know them later on more so then, but of course they were, with this album and a lot of their other albums, there's songs all over the radio. I mean, they have a lot of, and not necessarily hits, but like, again, those FM staples that you hear,
the FM would go deep on them because they have a lot of great songs, but and they're like, classic rock staples and not necessarily chart hits. Kind of like we talked about Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin didn't have any really chart hits per se, but everybody knows their songs. And with Steely Dan, they're one of those. It's like Ricky Don't Lose That Number, and all that kind of stuff wasn't big as far as chart performance, but very popular just to be played on the radio. And then they would go even deeper. Like you said, you said Royal Scam, which was the album before this, which really didn't have a whole lot of that. That was actually probably the weakest album in terms of hits,
singles,
but it had like the deep cuts like Kid Charlemagne and the Fez and stuff like that. And that's kind of Steely Dan is in that range where they're not chart toppers, but the songs are recognizable and smartly done. You know, and you're right about Royal Scam. It was a more guitar heavy, a little heavier on the guitar work. Them evolving to Asia really is what it is. I mean, you know, you can. This is one of those great artists that you can kind of listen to the discography, and you kind of feel that they're getting there.
Yeah, it's the journey. Yeah, every album.
Yeah, they're getting there, and
more
then
and more
Asia
sophisticated.
is literally the arrival.
Yeah,
and then Gaucho is could be called the overshot of it. You know, shooting a little further, and the results are similar, but not exactly the same.
Right, and then they would, you know, come back years later, which you know, it's a little acclaim. I mean, I was actually I was glad to see something new by them, but
they won a Grammy for was it Two Against Nature? Was
Two
their
Against
return
Nature?
album?
It was a decent album. I mean,
they beat out Eminem. They did. Like, go figure.
Yeah, just because they're so eccentric, and it's just odd. It's just a really odd sound that they have, and I just can't really describe it in words. It's just
thinking man's music.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means, but I just
it really is. I mean, they, you know, Fagan is pulling references out of the air. Like, he's talking about stuff that nobody really knows.
Yeah, he drops names. He drops alcohol, liquor, drinks. He has such a deep vocabulary and smarts to pull from in his songwriting or in their lyric writing that it's not like anything.
They're really big film buffs as well. I mean, they go deep there. We're not talking like Star Wars. We're talking, you know, they're digging deep. They're referencing movies I've never even heard of, and you know, but I love that though. I don't find them pretentious per se. It's just they do it well.
Yeah,
and they're you know, they're just I guess they don't really care if you think so or not. You know, it's just they just do what they do, and I love it.
They're from that pedigree of the Studio Hound. You know,
that's right.
That they you know, and they made those decisions as well. You know, they were formed in 1971, and if you're not sure what the name Steely Dan is,
well, here we go. This is
there's a novel by William S. Burroughs, Naked Lunch.
Yeah.
And it's taken from the name of a sex toy from that novel. So there you go. That's it. But originally they had a lead singer or another singer, David Palmer. And you'll know him from that song Dirty Work, which is probably the most un-Steely Dan sounding song. And especially since David Palmer sings it, so it's not the normal Donald Fagen stuff. It's easy to listen to it, and you know that song, and it's like a classic rock song, but you don't immediately associate it with Steely Dan.
Yeah,
but it was used to great effect in the beginning of American Hustle.
Yes, it was. I think that entire album has that feel, though. I mean, they're just, you know, I think they just at that point they just wanted to do a rock and roll record, you know, because they are real big rock and roll buffs. I mean, you know, they do talk about all the greats that everybody else is into, and you know, that kind of thing. So, but they're also into Black American music as well. So, which is it's what I like. You know, I dig the R&B, the sort of Motown. I like the jazz. I like, you know, that kind of stuff. So
I think they morphed towards that as they went along.
They do.
Like you said in the beginning, it was definitely more of a group endeavor.
Yeah,
because you had Skunk Baxter, who was a prolific session guitarist. He would later join the Doobie Brothers. You had Denny Diaz, who was an expert virtuoso guitar player too. So this was a band of musicians that were really good at what they did. And in the beginning, it was a band effort.
Yeah.
And you know, kind of the all for one for all type thing. And as the years went on, you know, Becker and Fagen asserted more control over the group, and then eventually said, you know what, I think it was in 1974 was their last tour, and they're like, we don't want to tour anymore. And this this is a story that we've told before.
That sounds very familiar. Right?
They're like, we want to write songs and be in the studio. So that effectively kind of left these other members kind of out in the lurch. They're kind of like, okay, well, you know what? So, you know, Skunk Baxter goes and he joins the Doobie Brothers. Which Michael McDonald would join later on too, and Michael McDonald figures somewhat heavily into Steely Dan and more so Asia.
The later period, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they just kind of got that same thing. The Beatles, right? The Beatles went through it. We don't want to tour anymore. It's just we don't want to do that. Brian Wilson, I don't want to tour anymore. I want to stay in the studio.
Mm-hmm.
Some other one, Lindsey Buckingham preferred to be in the studio, didn't tour, but then embraced touring. Jeff Lynne prefers to stay in the studio, doesn't want to tour, but recently tour. So you get a feeling for these quote unquote artists that are dedicated to the craft of music and see touring and playing live as, I guess, maybe as somewhat of a distraction or a nuisance. Like we don't, that's not where it's part of the business. For them, it's not where the passion is, right? It's a necessary evil.
It is. It's part of the business. And they do have a great disdain, like most artists, the real big eccentric artists, they always have, it's the art over the business. And, there's a certain disdain for the, the record business. But I mean, you got to play the game sometime, you got to get out there and do what you got to do. But yeah, I mean, I often read, like little quips of, they're both saying how much they hate touring. And it's, I actually did get to see them. Luckily, I got to see them right before Walter Becker died, which was cool. And they did perform the entire album.
Nice.
Of Asia. I think it was. I'm guessing it was the anniversary of the album. So yeah, that was like I think it was 17 maybe, in Pennsylvania.
I think he passed away in 17.
Did he?
Yeah.
It wasn't that long after that I'd seen them that he passed away, but he looked perfectly fine on stage. No. And boy, they sound great. I mean, even the live show is. You talk about perfection. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard a band sound that perfect live in every band that I've seen. And there's some close calls there, but yeah, they were on point every step of the way. The backing singers, all the session musicians.
Didn't you say when you saw the Banana Splits that they sounded just like they did on the record?
Banana Splits, what? Hey,
that wasn't them.
No.
No. Steely Dan is also really good for that whole performing an album in its entirety. I mean, they would do that a lot, just unrelated to anniversaries or anything. Like, we're going to do Asia or we're going to do Pretzel Logic, which is great for the fans if you're into that kind of stuff. I think if I'm not mistaken, I think they used to, at some tours, they used to have a wheel, and they would spin the wheel, and whatever song came up, they would play.
They did that.
I think they did that. I think Elvis Costello might have done that as well, but I think they
did that.
I don't know
if
they
show.
were the first ones to do that, where they would have a wheel and they would spin it, and whatever came up, it's like, okay, we'll play that.
Yeah, I do remember that they did that when I saw them. Yep,
that's balls. I mean, you got to
right.
You got to be ready for anything and everything.
You do. You got to be right on point. Yeah, you got to be sharp to know exactly. Oh my God, we haven't played this in a really long time, but you got to be ready. And they did it was impeccable and absolutely impeccable. Even my brother was impressed, who was not really into this kind of thing. And I went to see him with him, and he was into it. He's like, yeah, these sound great. And I'm like, no, I told you, this is what I like, like he's all into, metal and that kind of stuff. And which is fine, but it's like, I prefer this kind of music. There's something, I don't know.
I think when you go see them too, because they're such perfectionists in the studio.
Yeah.
I think you're going to get an elevated live experience because they're not going to half-ass it, right? They're going to be committed to replicating that as close as possible and assembling musicians that can do it. So you're going to get like a high quality show when you do go see them.
That's right. I mean, even, they'll do that. But on the other hand, I also like musicians who know how to expand upon what they do. I do like every now and again somebody changing the arrangement of a song. I mean, that takes balls to do that as well. People like Sting, who could take a Police song and change up the entire arrangement, make it slower, make it faster, whatever, put horns to it, whatever it is, whatever they're in the mood. That to me is looking beyond what was done as well. So that, there's that little bit of extra, there too. Then you got to be on point with that as well. So in a live setting, I kind of enjoy it. Sometimes I don't want to hear the record. I want to hear something different, but
I
But in
always
case of
want to hear the record.
but in case of Steely Dan, though, because the music requires it is such, it is, very fine tuned and very, you
Yeah.
really don't want to see them go off.
No, because
they could jam this stuff out, certainly with the
yeah.
with the kind of musicians they have with them. They could certainly take it to that level, and they could
Yeah,
just,
but this is all arranged music. I mean, that's the thing, is that's why they stop touring, is so
Mhm.
they can concentrate on creating this kind of layered music. And Asia, what is like the pinnacle. It's
Yeah.
the zenith of what they were trying to do, and they did it in such a a way that is unheard of as well.
Mhm.
With by this time, there really was no band left, so it was Becker and Fagan and studio musicians.
Yeah.
And when we say studio musicians for Asia,
We got an army.
up to 40 different musicians
That's right. And
were involved in this in one form or another. And if you look at the credits, like who played on like who played on what song, there's only 7 songs on this album. Okay.
Mhm.
So you might think, oh, this is a pretty sparse album. No, but each song really is its own thing. And but then the whole album melds. This whole album has a consistent tone and feel to it, which I think is the thing too. It's not like some of these other albums, like we said in the past, where it's contrasting and there's different like things, and that's the point. With Asia, the whole package, like that's the thing.
Yeah.
Is the package itself, is this whole thought is consistent, and it's funk, it's jazz, it's pop, it's rock, it's a fusion of all that.
And it
But
comes
it all
from them.
makes sense. It would sound like, using that many adjectives would sound like this is a goddamn mess.
Right. But it's coming
to pull that off.
And they knew exactly what they wanted, both of them collectively. And if you think about it, each song, let's face it, for every song, there's pretty much a different band playing. You got like maybe 4 or 5 different bands playing, collectively on this album for each song.
Yeah.
So it could sound different. It should sound different.
It should. And
But
the
it
thing is, it doesn't. Right. That's the amazing. That's what I was getting to is,
yeah,
when you're using up to 40 people, and like you said, it's not like Pet Sounds, where Brian Wilson used the Wrecking Crew, got 15 people in a studio and used them all.
Mm-hmm.
What Steely Dan would do is one day there would be like 5 or 6 guys coming to cut a track.
Yep.
Then the next day, 5 or 6 different guys would come in to cut the same track. And they just kept on looking and searching for different combinations and different feels.
Right. Who's the best
so you, as well arranged and as well thought out as this is, you would think that they would know exactly what they wanted, but they kind of didn't. They kind of like, let's get a different guitar player in and let them try this solo. And that didn't work. So they would call another guy in and say, come on in and take a crack at this solo.
Yeah.
Until they found like the right mix and meld. And that's the beauty. And that's why when you look at the credits, it's a,
Somebody said it was one of the guitar players, and who said it, and he said they weren't looking for perfection. They were looking to make an album that you will enjoy listening to. And so they went beyond. They were looking over that fence of saying, we don't just want to make a perfect album for us. We want to make this as perfect for everyone out there, and and be that consistent with it. And it is musically probably it is somewhat deceptive in its accessibility in terms of the music, because it's very catchy. It catches you, and it's so, some of it's really light and sunny. Lyrically, on the other hand, it might be something totally different, which is what they do. Like they talk about, they talk about stuff that I have no idea what they're saying, what they're referring to, but it works. It absolutely works. And yeah, they totally refined it and made it. It's sublime.
Yeah,
that's probably the best word.
Yeah, this is like the album. You come home from work, you pour yourself a glass of wine, you sit on the couch, the lights are dim, and you put on Asia, and you just you just let it take you away. It's just like that whole. It's like such a mood setting album.
Yeah.
It kind of, it's its own, its own entity. When you put it on, it's kind of like you just gotta like kind of sit down and just relax and listen to it and enjoy all the different, the workmanship. I mean, that's what this is. This is like literally like a piece of art.
Yeah.
The workmanship that was put in, like you said, how loosey goosey, and like with all these different people, and not looking for perfect solos, but in not doing that, they achieved something perfect because they were just looking for the right sound.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't know what it was until they just kept on cycling people. It just come on in, and people are getting frustrated, and oh, not mine. Okay, well,
Yeah.
then the next guy would come in, and they would do this with the drummers. They would do this with the bass players.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the guitarists. They were just bringing different drummers in because they all have different styles and different ways of playing. And you got Rick Marotta and Paul Humphrey and Steve Gadd. I mean, all these heavy hitters, and
That's right.
Jim Keltner from the Traveling Wilburys and Bernard Purdy. I mean,
Yeah.
these are rock, jazz, fusion drummers, players coming from all these different disciplines on this album, and you would never know, right? Like you said, you would not know that this was not like a group of people, that this was like 15 to 20 different people.
But it's engineered. It's engineered to a certain degree where you cannot tell. You could swear it's the same band. Every guitar, to me, I mean, the tone of the guitars, they're very similar. You really can't get a sense of like, well, this guy has a very distinct style or whatever. I don't know how they did it, but they managed to make it sound like we said, it's very consistent, very,
yeah. And
it could be the very, just the same group of people. It's just amazing. It is one of the best produced albums of all time, in my opinion. It's
yeah. I mean, I have a really crappy vinyl version, and it still sounds great. And like I put it on, like even with the pops and the cracks, the music that's in there just is incredible. I mean, you've got like the first side only has 3 songs, but it's got 3 like of the most iconic Steely Dan songs with Black Cow, Asia, and Deacon Blues. None of these are chart hits. These are radio staples, though, especially Deacon Blues. I think more so recently. I think that's kind of risen as like one of the deep cuts off of this album that people like.
That's my favorite, like known track, so to speak. But Asia, but I love Asia. I mean, the length of Asia. They tried to do something. They expanded it, made it. I think it's the longest song on the album. They brought in Wayne Shorter on saxophone, who's the guy's played with Miles Davis, for God's sake. I mean, this is like we're talking
Weather Report. I mean,
quality stuff here, quality people. So these are no schmoes. Like they knew how to pick the right people, and it's just a testament to, and the idea of that kind of collaborative spirit where people come in and I'll do it. I don't have to do this. I could do my own thing. I could, whatever. I go off and, whatever, but it's not the case here. It's just, they just bring them in and they, to make something special, that's music to me. I love that kind of thing. When that kind of thing happens, unfortunately, I don't think it happens enough, in this business, where it's, at each other's throats in certain bands, and you did this and blah, 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 but it's.
I don't think you're gonna get away with this style of recording anymore, too. Where
no,
you're having people come in, and you're paying them for the session, and then they go home the next day, and it's like, okay, get me, these people, bring them in, and we do the same song, and we see how it feels, and we see what it is. It's like, it's kind of like an experiment. There is an end result that they're looking for, but they're not really sure perhaps what it might be. They're not going to know until they hear it. And the only way to know until you hear it is to try out all these different things, and then you get, the gem from this one, or the big song is Peg, which is definitely one of their best songs of all time. You talk about catchy. It's got that shuffle. That's got that shuffly drum in it. It's got the catchy keyboard progression and great vocal by Donald Fagen. I mean, I think that song like kind of encapsulates Steely Dan.
Yeah,
like if you're going to play somebody Steely Dan, you're probably going to play them Peg, or I don't even, maybe
or Josie,
or Josie. Maybe Hey 19, but as far as like what encapsulates them, it's Peg. It's just got the catchiness. It's got it's the whole thing, but in a pop song. Like you said, the other songs are a little bit longer because they do expand on some of the musical ideas that they're trying to do, and that's where you get that jazz feel, because that's when they expand into those territories of a little bit more free form and some jamming, but it's not rock jamming. It's in the jazz. Textures. It's got the jazz flavor. Yeah.
With Asia, it starts off really light, really, kind of smooth, and it just kind of builds up. By the end of the song, you're just, wow. It's amazing.
The drums are going, and the sax is just rolling up and down, and then it comes back down, and then it comes back down again, and it returns to the vocal, and the vocal is just as steady as it was in the beginning. It's not affected by all the soloing that went on, like usually with rock songs, that the vocals get a little more, impassioned and more as you kind of come out of those things. And it's just kind of, it returns to that even keel, and everything kind of pulls back.
Yeah.
And it just, up on the hill, like it just kind of returns to it.
He's
and it just kind of, it's kind of a wave that comes over you, and then it kind of recedes on that song. Really good.
Yeah, just to look at these two figures, though. I mean, they look. I get.
They're just so unassuming. They're so not rock and roll,
right?
They're the antithesis.
To hear them talk about the album, I did in prep for this. I watched the classic album episode.
Which is a great documentary for anybody to watch. Right. It's the VH1, classic album series, and
how they break everything down, and they go through each track, and it's great. But just to hear them when they're sitting at the board, and they're just like, that was good. That was pretty good. And they're so dry about it. Just so they just, we did some good stuff.
They're very clinical about it, because that's how they approach it. Like they don't, they don't really approach it from like a heart and soul point of view, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. They approach it from like a technical and, how can we construct this so it sounds really good, which has its appeal too. If you listen to this album, that's what it is that's what happens when people get together and they in this type of a creative thing of, we're going to create this, how are we going to go about it? Well, just haul everybody in. And Home at Last, which is, again, all these songs are kind of just all fit together to give you this overall feeling. And I got into this late. I was not early on to the whole Steely Dan thing. Except for those albums that except for the songs that you hear.
I was surprised when you said that this is one of your favorite albums. You'd said that, like, whoa, Steely Dan.
Surprise!
I knew I was kind of into him, but I kind of went off at we have a friend, a mutual friend, who's really into him as well. I remember listening to probably more with our friend John than with you.
Yeah, probably.
But, I mean, I know you. I think you probably. I think the album that we probably all came together on was Fagen's Nightfly album.
I was later. I was late to the game with that too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But
I was late. I was very late to the game. You guys were. I was into. I mean, I love the song "New Frontiers." I love that song. That is a song that is it very easily, when it ends, it gets played again. Anytime it comes on, when that song ends, I play it a second time.
I love the music video too.
That was. I just love that out. Like that's a great companion to Asia, because it's another great just kind of piece of work that Fagen did. It was his first solo album after they broke up. But
I had every album he came out, Comic Harriad, that sci-fi thing that he put together, that little concept. I have no idea what it was about. But I even later on he did. It was not in the later years. It was in the 2000s he put out another solo record, and I got that. I have to, and it's just some of it's good, some of it's not so great, but it's just you just got it. It's like
he's a very compelling. He's a compelling person.
He is, absolutely.
Just as a figure.
He even did one of the things I like watching on YouTube is Criterion Collection videos. People come into what they call the Criterion closet.
Yeah, I've seen that.
The closet videos. Donald Fagen did one. I think he did one. They never aired it, but I know he did one. But he did do a top 10 of movies. Half the movies he picked, I've never seen, never heard of. It's just okay. But the way he describes him, his writing, it's just like, wow, this guy is smart. I would hate to be in a conversation with this guy because he'd be like, he'd be like
Yeah.
blown away, But yeah, but I
Yeah,
like that. I like that sort of more esoteric, eccentric vibe that these two, but they know what they're doing, and they this is one of the most unique sounding. You call them a band, if you call it a band, whatever it is, nobody sounds like Steely Dan, in my opinion. I don't. It's one of those like things where it's like the Doors in a sense, because nobody really sounded like them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they were unique in what they did, and Steely Dan.
Yeah, no, Steely Dan has a niche in rock and roll that no one really occupies. I mean, there is no one that you could argue Southern. You could talk about Southern rock. You could talk about this, that, and the other thing. And Steely Dan doesn't. There's not really a jazz rock.
You could argue, groups like Chicago, like in the early days.
Well, we're going to get into Yacht Rock, which is kind of a genre, but not really. But before we go any further, I think we need to talk about Michael McDonald also.
Okay,
because he kind of figures heavily into this album, and Michael McDonald was kind of like Phil Collins before Phil Collins. Like, this guy didn't say no to anything. So in 75, he joins the Doobie. He's recruited by the Doobie Brothers. So because Tom Johnston was having some medical issues, so they needed somebody, and so they get Michael McDonald. But he's doing all this other like session work as well, and he figures, if you listen to Peg and the backing vocals, that is Michael McDonald.
You can't mistake that voice.
You can't mistake his voice. He was all over. He was with Kenny Loggins in that song "This Is It." So Michael McDonald was like in the background of so many songs, but still with the Doobie Brothers. And I think at one point they're like, "Yo, you gotta stop, because you're kind of watering down like our product, really, right?" Because he's like everywhere. But the vocal hoops that they put him through, because it's one thing to be playing a guitar solo or be playing an instrument a certain way. They needed him to sing a certain way. They actually needed him to sing chords and stack his own vocals, which he said was a challenge even for an accomplished singer like him. He's like, this is not easy to do, to sing.
No, it's not.
The three parts of a chord and get it exact. So when you hear stuff like Peg and some of the other stuff he does on this album, again, it's just all these different pieces from musical instruments to vocal instruments coming together and using these people. And he had, Michael McDonald had sung on, I think he was on Royal Scam as well.
You'd be surprised what the human voice can accomplish.
Yeah.
And putting those track, those vocal tracks together just by themselves, the isolated, amazing. It's like a little symphony in itself. And they actually on the classic, they actually apologize and, sorry, Michael, we did this to you. But they played all of those those harmonies together. It's
a great document if you want to learn about really how the sausage is made with literally with music. The Steely Dan documentary about this album, it really is one for the books, because you get them, like Eric said, they're on the board and they're sliding instruments back in and out, and they're actually finding stuff that was buried in the mix. Like, oh, I didn't realize we left that in, and or this was in here still, or like, oh, do you remember this? We tried that and that, and it's great to see, not only to hear the music, but to hear the thought process behind it and what they were trying to achieve, and that's just a big part of this album. Is just they went through all this work so you could sit down and just listen to this thing. And just really take the ride. I mean, it's one of those albums, like, you put it on and it's just like, boom. Yeah. I don't know what to say. But you were talking about their sense of humor and how they're kind of ordinary guys. Well, on the Royal in Royal Scam, there's an album a song called "Everything You Did." And there's a lyric in there called it says "Turn Up the Eagles."
Turn up the Eagles.
Yes.
It's gonna
Eagles heard that. And Glenn Frey heard that.
Don Henley,
so they did respond. So since Steely Dan name checked Eagles would go one better. And in Hotel California, the original lyric was supposed to be "Stab it with their Steely Dan," but they changed it to "Steely Knives."
Nice, yeah, that's great.
And Glenn Frey was like, yeah, well, they kind of name checked us, so we'll return the favor. So that's kind of a little interesting tidbit of trivia as well.
It's also probably the most controversial song on the record, because it's not, it's, yeah, it goes pretty deep, goes pretty dark. And that entire album is all about crime. That's the reoccurring theme on that record is just, it's not a concept per se, but it is like every song is about a different type of crime, kind of thing. They even talk about like this, the second song is about cave paintings that were done like thousands of years ago, that they're, like who talks about that? Who like comes up with these concepts, right? Like cave paintings that were proved to be like a hoax, I think. So it was like people were trying to say that, these people drew this stuff like way back in the day before, whatever, but it actually turned out to be true. It was, they did try to debunk it, but it actually came out to be true. But like I said, like who thinks of, like, who would think of like writing a song about that?
Encapsulated in a song.
Exactly. And put it in the context of like, we're even talking about crime that supposedly happened thousands of years ago. It's like,
shows you how far back it goes.
Esoteric they get, like just weird stuff,
Yeah. And that's the progression is they kind of went through those different phases to get to Asia, which again is the masterstroke of their career. Mm-hmm. They literally started recording their follow-up right afterwards. Actually, there is a song that came out from this era that did not make it on an album, and it would fit very easily on Asia, and that's FM.
Yeah.
FM was written for the soundtrack of this really disastrous movie called FM. It was the title track, and it was the main song.
It's one of their best.
Yeah, it's just it fits. It totally fits in this album. It was recorded right at the tail end of when they were finishing up Asia. They knocked it out, and it's got that same feel. So then they go right into the studio. They start recording their follow-up album. Mm-hmm. But it didn't get released for a few years because they were on the ABC label, which is a really defunct and ancient label. I think like the Osmonds were on ABC or Partridge Family. I don't know who was on it, but they got bought by MCA. And with all the squabbles and everything that was going on, Gaucho, their follow-up was Gaucho, it was ready to go. It got shelved for a couple of years because of all the issues with MCA and promotion and getting things done. Mm-hmm. It finally came out in 1980. And it's kind of like, it's really good. I really like Gaucho, and it continues the themes and it continues what they were doing. It's just a tiny bit slicker.
It's at that point, it's a little bit more of the same, I feel.
Yeah.
Right.
But the sound is just, it started to get that extra sheen on it of production. But it was a great album nevertheless. But it kind of, I think by that time the bloom was off the flower. They were starting to also bicker. Becker was bickering. Bicker. And there was some drug issues as well. So at that point, after Gaucho in 1980, they pretty much called it quits. That was it for them. And so they had hit the pinnacle, had started working on the follow-up. That just became disastrous because of the record company. And I think that just kind of, ended everything for them. And they would go dormant for a long time. But like we said, Donald Fagen would start making some solo albums. And the wonderful, the Nightfly, it's got the song IGY, What a Wonderful World.
I love that one.
New Frontier and, Maxine.
Michael McDonald on that record too.
Yeah.
Like, he brought a lot of these people. And do you think it sounds like Steely Dan? Is there a difference, do you think? Or
what, in Gaucho?
No, in the Nightfly, like his solo work.
It does sound a little different because it's throwback. It's throwbacky, and I mean that in a good way.
I think Gaucho is kind of climbing towards that because he was playing those weird, like he was starting to experiment with. You blow into it. It's like playing a horn, but it's a keyboard.
It's got the keyboard on it. Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about. That sound, that certain sound that was very prevalent on Gaucho. And then of course he carried that over to Nightfly. So to me, I think that's where it falls into that similar vein, but
I think the Nightfly is a little bit more nostalgic because it is about when he was young, when he was a kid growing up. So there is a different point of view on it. And I think that's why it's a great listen too, because it's the lyrics are very story driven and it's just a great one. Yeah. But what would happen is, this term would start to be coined in around the early 2000s, like 2005 or something. A new genre of music would emerge called yacht rock.
I
What?
I don't know what that means.
You don't know what that means?
I've heard it. Obviously, I've heard it, but I don't acknowledge it. It's
You do not
stupid.
know.
It's just stupid to me. It's like yacht rock. What are you trying to say? You know,
Well,
like
let me give you some examples of yacht rock then, and you can tell me
yeah.
if they fit in. Okay, I'll give you just a handful of yacht rock.
Okay.
You'll have bands, but besides Steely Dan, you'll have bands like Ambrosia,
Okay.
Dr. Hook, Dan Fogelberg, Little River Band, Jerry Rafferty,
Mm-hmm.
Seals and Crofts, Boz Scaggs, Pablo Cruz,
Yeah.
Toto, and Gino Vanelli. What do you think?
So yeah, I mean they're all kind of like light, breezy, jazzy,
Adult-oriented rock, I guess, is what it used to be called, right?
middle of the road. Actually, I
Yeah.
think that was the term back
Okay.
back then.
Yeah,
It was middle
MOR.
of the road. What is yacht rock trying to imply though? Is it because
It's smooth. It's kind of jazzy. It's
Oh,
well.
is
I
this
also
the
I
only,
think
this is stuff that only like what rich people listen to, or
no, I think
or is it
that's
there's
what you would get the
certain, like-
impression that you're on a yacht and you're drinking
Oh,
champagne and you're listening to this.
there's a certain air about these people that they're
Exactly.
putting on that they're like, oh, we're like, more sophisticated or something. I
I
don't
think
know.
what it implies is that the music is so well produced.
Okay.
If you think about all those artists, right, like Ambrosia
Yeah.
and these other ones, they all, like Boz Scaggs, these are all well produced and well made songs from these people, right? So I
Mhm.
think it's more there's nothing rough like the Who or Zeppelin or crunchy like AC/DC. It seems to be quote unquote like slickly produced music.
Mm-hmm.
So stuff
Yeah,
you would,
I get it.
if you were at a party and you were with some friends on a boat, you'd be playing Foreigner, and Kenny Loggins and Nicolette Larson and, that kind of stuff.
But would you put Steely Dan in that category though? I don't know. I think they're a little bit apart from that really polished one-hit
I think
wonder.
their popular stuff fits in there. Their later stuff, I think the stuff from Asia and Gaucho absolutely fits into that mold of really well produced, fantastic sounding, jazzy. This is not, I'm going to say unoffensive, meaning that it's just kind of like quote unquote not challenging, but I would not say that Asia is like that at all. But I think it's a broad generalization for a style of music that's kind of stuff you would hear on light FM, I suppose.
So in other words, it could be also called yawn rock, maybe. Right? Are we that boring?
Music
we love
to
this
snooze
stuff?
by.
Are we that? I don't know. It's just weird how this stuff comes up, but I don't pay attention to that.
Well, they're running out of genres.
I like what sounds good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do like a well produced album. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No.
It's not all
Me neither.
punk rock and rough. There's a certain
There's a place for everything.
Yeah, I have a certain ear for that, and there's a time and a place for that kind of thing too. Sure, but this stuff, if you want to say, the '70s was full of that stuff. You could even put ELO in that category. Chicago, certainly.
Chicago's on the list. They got Firefall,
10cc. You could put
England Dan, and John Ford Coley.
Yeah. Christopher Cross.
Yeah, he's on there too.
Yep.
So all that stuff. So you're getting a feel for what yacht rock is. It's that kind of just that smooth, poppy music.
I just don't for the term. I find the term itself.
Would you rather it be called kayak pop or kayak rock?
I just think the term itself is rather snooty, rather pretentious.
Oh, absolutely. It is.
It
gives you the impression of, this is
hoity-toity in a way, because I liked this stuff when I was a kid.
You had champagne tastes.
Well, there you go. Maybe I'm an old soul or whatever, but I don't, so I do take offense.
Canoe
taking
rock.
a stand.
Yeah, I don't know why. It is an insulting term because it does imply it's music for older people as well. I think a little bit of ageism when you hear the words yacht rock, you think of old people or, like these rich people and, hoity toity. And Steely Dan, if you go listen to, Do It Again and Reelin' in the Years, I don't think that's not yacht rock to me.
Or listen to the album before Asia, Royal Scam. Yeah. There's some, some real gritty stuff on there as well. So we're not 76. So we're not,
Well,
so you could say the later stuff. I guess you could apply that to Sting, artists like Sting and that kind of, Phil Collins and sure, certainly. But I don't know. I don't find anything wrong with it. So, what do you think?
Go sit on your yacht and listen to Steely Dan.
But what do you think? How do you feel about it? Do you like the term? Do you care? Do you really care?
It's funny.
It's funny.
It's funny because right before the pandemic, before the lockdown, I was supposed to go see a band called Yacht Rock Review.
Oh my goodness!
And they did all of this type of music.
Oh my no!
And that's what it was. It was like this type of thing. Like it was a cover band, but they did like all these artists. Literally, like the week that everything got shut down is when the concert was supposed to be, and
that's crazy.
That was in 2020, and it got canceled, so I never got to. So I don't have a problem with labels because, like you said, I don't care. Call it whatever you want. It means what it means to me, no matter what the label is.
Yeah.
It doesn't. And this album, I think this album kind of defies labels because it's not rock and it's not jazz and it's not pop and it's not funk, but it's all those.
Right.
And it's just like
albums that could take you to a lot of different places too.
Yeah. And I'm so sorry that I came like so late in the game to this one, but I guess I wasn't ready for it, and when I finally did, I'm like, wow, like, I was really able to appreciate it. And I think if it was something that was maybe pushed on me at an earlier time, I might not have been as receptive to it.
Yeah. Well, nobody really likes to be told what to like. You know what I mean? There's a certain, we were all guilty of it. I think, we're all like, you got to get into this band. You got,
what's the matter with you?
You got to be, yeah. And the more somebody does that, I don't care who you are, the more you're going to
push against it.
Exactly. It always it's just the way,
Yeah.
So
there's a way around that is you have to have people in your car when you're driving so you control the music. See, that was always my thing.
Enough.
That's why I had the car, so I controlled the music, and that was, so you're at the mercy. So you had no choice but to listen to some of the crazy stuff.
There you go. Yeah, you're right. Dean had the license first, the car first.
Yeah.
Yep.
But back when this stuff was in its heyday, it was not on my radar. Outside of it being on the radio.
Yeah.
Right. Outside of like the hits like Peg and Hey 19 and these other ones, Ricky Don't Lose That Number, Steely Dan was not on the radar for me whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
It was just kind of there. Like I said, you and our friend Johnny got into the Night Fly when it came out, but again, outside of like, oh, New Frontiers is really catchy and I dig it and it's got a clever video, it came and went, passed through my life. And I don't know how I came across it again. I don't know if I don't know if a friend of mine was replacing his CD collection.
Mm-hmm. And
I think he just gave me like all of the old ones. So like when the stuff gets remastered, the old ones are worthless, whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think I ended up getting these CDs. And I'm like, okay, okay. Like, and he gave me Rush. He gave me like all these Rush things. He gave me all this Rolling Stones. And I was like, I'm not going to listen to all of it, but I was like, probably Asia was like the iconic album. Even if you didn't know Steely Dan, I was like, that's the one.
Right.
So I put that on and I'm like, wow, and that's what did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is like
the perfect album to start with. Although
you might be disappointed. I mean, if you start with this, you're going to be disappointed in everything else.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you could make a really good case for their greatest hits album, honestly.
Well, yeah, but
or at the very least, not the whole shebang with the box set, but there was a 2-disc that came out in 2000, The Story of Two, I think it was called, or whatever, and that had like pretty much everything you needed. It had all the hits plus some of the deep cuts as well. So you were pretty much good to go there. So if you were not familiar with Steely Dan and you just wanted to have something, that's a good starting point as well. But no, I going back and listening to their records, with each album, they just got progressively more and more sophisticated. And like I said, I keep bringing up Royal Scam, but these two albums for me were the pinnacle, because Royal Scam was like, they got to that point, but Asia, they refined it.
Yep. That's what I was exactly going to say. That is refining, like putting that razor sharp edge on the music and figuring out like, okay, yeah, this is what we want. It's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of people. It's going to take a lot of musicians, but we're not going to stop until we've got it.
Right.
And they did. They stopped, and I think they got it. And I think this is an album that really needs to be listened to, and just literally sat down and listened to. I'm not even going to recommend put it on in the car. I'm going to usually put this on in the car and listen to it. But I'm going to say, like, sit down. Like you got to set the mood for this. Like,
set the mood.
If you set the right mood for this album, it's going to be magical for you as well.
If you can listen to it with headphones too, that would be even better. But I mean, it has a really nice sound, overall.
Gorgeous.
I think they tried to actually, when they tried to remaster it with the SACD and, the 5.1 mix and all that kind of thing, they couldn't do it because they didn't have like some of the mix, the original mixes. So they had to cancel both projects. They couldn't actually re-release this thing as like these fancy, like, 5.10 audio thing. And
because they didn't have the mix. They didn't have the masters.
It just didn't exist. Yeah. They lost the masters, which is a shame. Just a couple of songs, but it's enough to.
We ended up getting what we got then. I mean, and I'm happy with it as it is.
Happy with that crappy vinyl that you got, because it's
I don't need the remaster. I'm good with it as it is. It doesn't need to be touched.
There you go.
It doesn't need to be tweaked. Album order doesn't need to be shuffled around. There's no complaints with this album. There is no nitpicks with this album as well. There is nothing to nitpick on this album. It's just sit down and listen to it and enjoy. And that is the final word for Steely Dan on this episode. The album is Asia. Check it out. It's a top shelf choice for us. It would go into the Hall of Fame along with The Stranger from Billy Joel, which we inducted on Billy Joel's episode. Another New York artist as well. You see a theme here. I think the New York artists have a little bit of edge, or they get a little handicaps, a couple of extra points on our end.
Yeah, I think so.
So that's going to do it.
It should be
for the it should they hometown heroes. That's going to do it for this episode of the 3324 podcast. Thanks for joining us. We always appreciate it. Check us out on social media. We do live shows twice a month, believe it or not. That's our commitment to you, is to not only have recorded entertainment, but you can interact with us live. We have a lot of fun. So check us out there. We go live on YouTube and on Facebook. And like I said in the beginning, social media, you can catch us there as well. For Eric, this has been Dean. Thanks for joining us. We will see you on the flip side.
You've been listening to the 3324 podcast with Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast and on Twitter at 3324p to join the conversation.